We don't want the design team to have a hissy fit and fight with the factory, and all of a sudden they're not doing you favors and you're at the back of the line, not the front of the line. That is why it's really important to respect the factories going in, to make sure that they have good tech packs, that you're doing something that they can produce, that you've already checked to make sure that they have the kind of machinery or capacity.
Welcome to Build a Business Worth Buying, the podcast where seasoned entrepreneurs, M&A experts, and world-class operators share behind-the-scenes stories of building, scaling, and selling remarkable businesses. I'm your host, Aaron Allpeter, and every week I sit down with people shaping the world of acquisitions, founders who've cashed out, buyers with bold strategies, and advisors who help make deals happen. This is not a podcast for beginners. It's for those who know the grind and want actionable insights to make their next big move. Get ready to take notes, rethink your strategy, and hear untold stories of what it takes to build a business worth buying. Today's guest is Sydney Marr. Sydney is known as one of the most sought after designers inside major fashion houses in North America and abroad. But she didn't always start out in fashion. In fact, she was a competitive ice skater, and an early accident forced a career pivot. By age 21, she was running her own couture design business, generating about $500,000 in revenue before shutting it down to step into larger apparel systems. From there, she went on to work inside major fashion brands where tastemaking wasn't simply artistic, it was economics and creativity. This included a stint at QVC where she spent thousands of hours in front of the camera, really helping to design these apparel brands and market them to a large audience. After a long career in apparel, she's moved into wellness and has her own wellness brand. In our conversation, we explore the mechanics behind taste and business discipline and really how product decisions ultimately translate into enterprise value. I really love this conversation. I think you guys are going to enjoy it as well. Sydney, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Yes, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really excited to dive into the conversation we're going to have. And it was a lot of fun for, where we started. So much to talk about.
Yeah, and for those of you who don't know, Sydney and I are actually neighbors. So she lives not too far away from me in Montreal. And we got breakfast a couple weeks ago, and I fell in love with her story, her expertise, and I'm just really looking forward to this. And I think, Sydney, really where I want to start is your experience in these fashion houses. And so can you just talk a little bit about how product decisions actually got made and who holds the economic power? Is it more of a designer's choice, a merchandising choice, or a finance choice?
Well, actually, it is kind of all of the above. It depends on where you start in fashion, whether or not you begin as a designer or as you were mentioning, a merchandiser. I started off in design as a young, I'm going to say, very inspired young designer, thinking I'm going to go out and, change the world with all of the different things that I designed. The first thing that one of my teachers said to me was, stop trying to be so original because the Greeks already designed it. And I realized that was sort of the super humbling moment. And you realize that in the machinery of a factory that there's payroll, there's fabric to be bought, there's shipments, there's, does the buyer love your product? And so, a designer really needs to be, or someone who's interested, not just designers, but people who are interested in getting into apparel need to have a really good understanding that it's something that the people actually want.
It sounds very obvious when you say that you got to make things that people actually want, but I think I hear what you're saying is that so many times, whether you're a founder or a designer, you're like, I'm the exception. I'm going to be doing something that's remarkable. You really developed this knack of understanding what was going to sell. What does that actually mean operationally? How did you do that?
Well, first of all, as a young designer in the early 80s, I actually, in my small studio, which my father helped me build in our family basement, I would go out there and work with all of the different buyers. So I was the one standing there with my rack of garments and showing them, and you looking at their faces and seeing, do you like this one? This is why I designed it. This is how it's supposed to fit. These are the garments that work with it. And I was the one who needed to make sure that they loved it, that it was going to work into their merchandise assortment. Because if you've already designed something that they already have, then they're already booked for that. So you not only need to come up with something that they want, but something that will support the rest of their assortment. So I started off by learning, the hard way. And luckily enough for me, they loved what I designed as a young woman. And then as I went along, I realized going into the different factories, and working with some really brilliant apparel makers, talking about what were the commodities, what was the price point, what was the price of the fabric that we needed to buy, and what was I allowed to spend on that collection, and what were the expectations? Like, where did it fit in to the cost card as a line item? Because once you design it, then you have to go and convince your bosses, hi guys, this is what I'm thinking of. This is how much of your money I want to spend. This is how much I cost. And what do I expect? Like my face, I have to stand in front of them and say, I spent X amount of dollars and my expectations are it's going to make this amount of money.
It's a lot of trust in a young designer. I mean, you started out by making costumes for ice skating stuff, and then you got
Yes.
into more of the haute couture stuff. Was there, what is it about kind of doing it yourself? And I think, the equivalent of hands-on keyboard when you're really young, to moving into these bigger design houses that helped you be able to have the confidence to communicate and understand that, hey, I'm going to spend $100,000, but you're going to make 500,000.
Well, I think it has a lot to do with discipline. And as a young figure skater, and it's fun because we're just talking about the Olympics and all of the skating that's going on. I was an elite athlete, but that comes with its own bumps. Many times of falling down, having coaches criticize you constructively. So you have to take the good with the bad. And I think it's really important to understand that when you're being criticized, it's for your own good to improve how to do a double axel, how to create a garment in the factory that is going to make the right amount of money, that is not going to cost so much that it's no longer profitable. So you need to know how the factories work and have a respect for what a fabric's going to do, what kind of lines that you have in the factory. Like, is it all sturging? Is it like, what kind of machinery do you have to work with? Is there an engineer on the floor who can make 3 stitches into 1 so that it's less time? So it's pretty fun to, I'm going to say, design into the capacities of the different factories, because that if a factory is, making garments like cupcakes, you're welcome. As a designer, I was welcome to go on the factory floor to understand how things would work and then go back and figure it out together with the team to make sure that we could make something that was profitable and that we knew was going to sell well.
You almost test into this criteria that everybody kind of inherently knows. And I guess there's a question of, is this criteria written down somewhere, right? Like if I'm starting out, can I just go borrow it?
It's really literally written anywhere. I mean, I have friends who are PhDs in, the apparel business. But that is something, there's a lot of young designers that, as I've interviewed a lot of people in the apparel trade for whether or not they're coming on as assistant designers, who say, oh, I just love researching ideas. And I'm thinking, how are you going to make us money? Do you know what I mean? It's like, no, also in the different factories I worked in the different companies that I was either a partner in or whether or not they were my own, it was like, okay, we have manpower. We need to produce so many sketches. Their productivity, if I'm handing it off to a young designer, then they need to produce four sketches in an hour. Otherwise, they're not productive. Because they can't take all day long. Yes, they can take time to figure out what they're doing, but then they have to produce. So if you're doing t-shirts, you know that the sample maker is working at, he or she can probably do 1 an hour. If it's a jacket, you've got 3 or 4 pieces you can make in a day, and that's it. So it has to be worth it.
Is there such thing as like universal taste? And it kind of feels like if you mentioned how you were looking at something and just being able to know, yeah, this is going to sell, this is going to do well. I wonder, is that easy for people to pick up on once they've been in the industry for a little while? And if so, why don't all apparel items look exactly the same?
Well, that has a lot to do with personal taste. But when I was approaching things, the first thing I wanted to know was how was the fabric? Like, did it feel soft on my skin? Was it something that someone wanted to reach for? We can have 20 pieces in our wardrobe, 200 pieces in our wardrobe, and like my old wardrobe that before I, started to purge was 2,000 pieces, but we still reach for the same 10 pieces. Why? So I think that it's sort of that feeling of what, and it will surprise people when they go back and reflect on that. Oh, why why did I reach for this piece? Why did you grab that, shirt of yours? And is it one of your favorites? And how many times have you actually been wearing it? Type of thing.
Yeah, I remember when we were in North Carolina, we had a much bigger house and much bigger closet, and I had things that, I hadn't worn in years, and we packed them up and moved down here. Now I've got a much smaller closet, and so I have to rotate, I have to purge, and so I think there's something in there with scarcity that's important.
Well, you know what's interesting? You asked me about the design work and what people reach for. And I remember I was walking through Walmart one day with my partners, and there was a category manager. And it was my introduction to this category manager because they were changing the structure of how we worked with the buyers. Because I had actually been involved in redesigning the George line for Walmart when it first arrived in the Walmart headquarters. And so the category manager was walking by. We're looking at the different things we had designed for the George collection. And she said, well, that's the ugliest thing I've ever seen. I said, oh, well, that's interesting because, and it was, of course, one of our pieces. It was one of the 4 ways that we're working on. I said, because today we sold 10,000 pieces. So it's not personal. You still need to bring a level of taste, but you need to design things that people actually want. And, when you have the ability to have visibility into what's selling in which city, at what rate, it's really fun to sort of like lean into the data of what people are responding to and say, oh, that was interesting. And then you go and you make more of that. And you realize when the trends are going down, do you need to tweak it or you just need to change it?
What is the difference between something that a designer really likes and something that other people want to buy?
Well, yes, we want to love what we do. And I think that it's important to have that integrity. But I have always told many of my team members that if they want to go and put funny tassels in weird places on garments, and that's the thing that's going to make them happy, to do it at home. Because when in the design studio, yes, we have a brand that we need to respect, but we also need to make things that are commercially viable and that the people will love and buy more of.
That's great. A lot of times I'll talk to founders who are just brilliant. They've got great taste. They've got, a good knack for design. But sometimes they can kind of get in their own way and they can be at a bit of a detriment to the overall growth or prospects of the business. From having seen companies of all different shapes and sizes, are there any behaviors or traits that these founder designers will have that will either greatly hurt or help a business?
Yes, I think that to a certain degree we have to be unattached to it. And I'm going to use my skating as an example. You go out there, you do your very best, and it is what it is. And you get off the ice, and if it was you want to go out and do better next time, or you can say that was great. But I think that sometimes young founders are too attached. I'm not a big fan of patents. I actually work with a number of clients who are going the patent route because they are patentable either by utility or some aspect that makes it really important to protect that. But when you patent a product, they can get so attached to it that then they forget that also they need a consumer who is going to love that. So with the same way with the design, so you want to have some, I'm going to say, be a little bit like Buddha, take a step back and be detached, because it's important that what you're creating really that it really does resonate with the consumers out there, because otherwise you might as well just make one for yourself at home and wear it and enjoy it with castles and weird places. But I think that when you're asking me about, is a founder really getting in his or her way, it's because sometimes it's, oh, if I just made it a little bit better. The truth is if you want to develop a great apparel collection, you're going to have your core items. You need at least 50% of the product is going to be repeats, because that is where the money is. The factories are getting better at it. They're going to be making more money. You can reduce your margins. You can improve it, but without getting in your own way. Still make it, ship it, turn over your dollars. Stop trying to come up with something that's super original. You can do that in the background of what's next, but it's important to remember that you are a business, that you have, banking, you have payroll, you have, there's factories to pay, and the whole purpose of making wonderful product is also to make profit so that you can turn over your dollar and you can go back and, present your business plans and your profit and loss and be really proud of it.
Yeah. I don't know why this analogy came to my mind, maybe because it's lunchtime, but it almost seems that, McDonald's has the McRib and all these other things that are kind of coming in and coming out. And that's a good marketing story. And that's a good thing for people to be like, oh, I got to go back there. But at the end of the day, they sell a lot of hamburgers and French fries. And so there's almost like a similar parallel here where if you're always trying to sell your version of the McRib, yeah, you might get people to come in and try that and be there, but you're not going to build as nearly healthy of a business than if you've got that everyday in and out that you're talking about.
Gap is a great example of that. I mean, Gap is maybe not going on the up and up these days. Maybe it's sort of flattened out, but the whole Gap premise was, let's get the core items. And they built it like a little bit of a pyramid. Here's the core items, and then the more fashionable were on top of it, less, more fashionable, less. Then so they built it so they had like the cherry on top, so they could rotate their inventory. And I've always respected that way of designing the collection. Starting with core fabrics. I love having control of fabrics so to make sure that establishes the look and feel of a brand. It also helps you control the quality to make sure that it's easier. You can either buy more fabric and set it aside, dye it up as needed. So there's a lot of moving parts when it comes to apparel that I think you can mitigate the risk if you make the right sort of decisions in terms of how you're going to build out the business. Like, what are your core fabrics? And then how you can start layering and testing the ones on top of it.
And when you say core, is that core is like, this is what the industry always wants, they want a cotton poly blend? Or is it, this is what core is going to be for our business?
Core for your own brand.
Okay. If we were building an athleisure business or something like that, what would be some examples of, say, this would be a core fabric or a core style, and then this is where we maybe be, one step above?
Okay, so for instance, if you think about Lululemon, right? They started off and they developed a fabric that they then called Luon. They trademarked it. It was developed at a factory here in Montreal, and it was they wanted to make it that it was really had great memory, and so it was about the percentage of elastane or spandex or lycra, depending on which generic category you've chosen. And what they did was they really leaned into like what that fabric was, and they made their perfect legging for yoga. So that was a great, I'm going to say, springboard for them developing the rest of their products. And they've gone on. We all know the Lululemon story, and we wish we were the perfect athleisure company like that. But then on top of that, they've been able to build in all of these engineered fabrics that have little patterns in them, but that's not their core fabric, is it? I mean, when you go in and your leggings or your jacket, your running jacket is worn out, you go back and you buy another one. I mean, how many leggings from Lululemon has your wife already bought?
More than I'd like to admit.
Never mind.
Yeah, well, to that point, I used to work at Lululemon, and it was remarkable the percentage of their profit that came from the Align leggings. Just one SKU, you talk about core of the core. That was it, right? And so you did everything you did to keep that going. So when you're thinking about architecting a business, whether it's something that you're just getting launched or you're thinking about how to scale it, How do you go about determining what your core is? Do you suggest that people just kind of start and see what resonates, or do you think that they should, kind of do what Lululemon did and really focus on a unique fabric or material and say, this is our hero fabric. We're going to, base everything off of that and go from there.
I think you have to do both. Really, like for instance, I just started with a client, and he's developing two types of new and interesting bags, and it's like, oh well, what's going to make them different? So we're sort of like unpacking the things that he really believes in, and I'm making it as sort of the checklist of what we're looking for and how we want those bags to perform, and that is going to inform me of what kind of fabrics. Like for instance, we're actually looking at a thermal fabric because of some of the specifications that he wants. And I think that it's a combination of the item that we're making and the fabric it's kind of where the magic happens. It's not just one or the other. I have another client that we're working with, and it's important that the fabric is cooling. So I call my fabric engineers, and I'm saying, tell me what are the right fibers that I need to work with that are going to naturally do this. While I might have a lot of expertise, there's really fun to have all of these experts around the world who I can call upon and collaborate with and say, yeah, this is the right kind of fiber. This is the right kind of knitting. These are the machines that we're going to be using. And that's how we also place and look at the supply chain of where all the goods are going to come from and how can we tighten it up to make the supply chain management, really efficient.
Yeah. Well, it's also what struck me about the apparel industry is how much innovation is happening in the space. I mean, people have had clothes since Adam and Eve, and like we still have all of this stuff that's going through, and it's changing so rapidly. How important is it for a brand to be kind of on the cutting edge and what's there versus, kind of sticking to a few tried and true basics that they don't have to necessarily think about fabric as a major differentiator for them?
Well, I find a lot of founders, they have an idea and they kind of need to start with what already is because it's very expensive to start thinking about number one, patents, whether or not they're developing new fabrics. There are a lot of universities that are very innovative here in Canada, and I'm sure every country has, their own innovation departments where they're trying to encourage different businesses to create things that are beyond. Like last year, I met with these people who had a Korean technology where they were taking eggshells and they were making the little pellets for plastic so then I got them connected with some of the military, some of my friends who had tool and die and had these wonderful machines, because the more we could make it sustainable and will break down, so they were able in sort of their plastic tooling to incorporate a portion of egg-based pellets to make it more sustainable. So
Wow.
that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would not have thought about that. That's a great example.
Yeah.
Um, you've been around a lot of fashion houses and apparel brands that have gotten very big very quickly. What breaks first when you're going through hyperscale, especially when you're dealing with something where taste and style is so important? It just feels like you could very easily pass this over to the finance team and end up with something that maybe it's profitable but loses its soul a little bit.
Well, I think as you're designing products and thinking about scaling, you really need to pay attention to where you're putting your money, as we're talking about. That everything needs to be a line item. And having the structure or looking to try to have at least 50% of your products repeats is going to help you feed the rest of the machine. It affords you to be able to develop new products. I mean, for instance, when I was working with Cirque du Soleil, I was brought in as I'm going to say a contract designer to develop their first boutique collection. And they were like, well, it wasn't for the performers. It was really for, if you and I, if we went to see one of the shows, and then as you walk through, there's all these different products that evoke maybe what the show is about, or it's a great memento for you to take away. So I ended up designing the first boutique collection. And what was really fun about that is that talking about not having a boutique collection, especially when you think about how Cirque du Soleil is all about the elevated arts. It's really about an experience that they want you to feel. I mean, when I was working with the people from Cirque du Soleil, and the headquarters are over here in Montreal, the founders they came into the boardroom, and it was really fun in the boardroom because it was on the second floor, and over one side of the boardroom was all windows to where the trapeze is. So as we were doing the presentation and talking about what this collection could be, you would see bodies sort of tumbling, and it was so fun. But I think they wanted us to remember that that's what it was all about. But one of the things they said to me is it can't be just a logo drop. You just can't take our logo and dump it onto t-shirts. That's not what we're looking for. We want a collection that will be the foundation of how we really want people to feel. And they said, you have to remember our mantra. It is invoke, evoke, provoke. So we want you to go away with that and come back to us with what you think that means and how our consumer is going to be able to relate to what we were offering. And I designed a whole bunch of different collections. I just, kind of had different samples and different boards and different groups. And the one they went with was called Color Therapy. And it was really fun. And it ran, I was very pleased because it ran for about 2.5 years.
That's amazing. What struck me about that story is that the founders were very clear about, hey, these are the parameters that you need to play in, right? This isn't a, just like you said, logo drop, let's move on. And I'm curious about when you're working with fashion houses that are on the extreme end of creativity and extreme, end of taste and those sorts of things. How do they balance that authenticity around the artistic credibility that they have and sell-through targets and just the dollars and cents of running a business?
Well, I think someone who is so ultra creative like that, I think that they're really niching down. So they're really speaking to who their customer is. So as opposed to a very commercialized design house. I mean, they're two very different markets. And I think that that's what's really important is, one, to identify who are you designing for? Like, what is the appeal? And is it a broad appeal? Like, for instance, as you know, I designed for QVC. I was invited to design for them and traveled all over the world. So that was very different because I needed to make the Sydney Mar fashions very, I'm going to say, what I needed to design, what was the core of Sydney Mar for the world. It wasn't just in my neighborhood, wasn't just, Montreal or New York or what have you. It needed to have a broad appeal, but still feel like a Sydney Mar fashion. So it's a very different when you're thinking about how are you going to be perceived and where you want to show up. If you know that if you were John Galliano, I mean, yes, he was talk about Central St. Martin's, one of the greats from Central St. Martin's. I think that he was so clear on who he was and how he wanted to show up that his theatrics and his design work then informed the rest of the diffusion lines which came below. In a small way, how extraordinary Cirque du Soleil performers' outfits were. That's not what I was designing, but it still needed to trickle down into, it still needed to look, smell, and feel like a Cirque du Soleil garment. So I think that it's the essence can still be maintained. And I think that that's what's fun is as a creative person, how I was able to have something that was successful. And in the same way, I think every founder has to be really clear on what it is, and it can be expressed in sort of extraordinary way or in a, like Ralph Lauren. Why does that little symbol of polo mean so much to just the guys on the street,
If you think about being a creative type, can you talk about any of the compromises that you had to make when you were maybe designing for QVC versus something where you could be a little bit more risk-taking or authentic to maybe what you wanted to do? I'm just curious, how do you bottle that up and say, okay, I'm willing to compromise on these principles, but not these principles, to make sure that it stays a Sydney Mar fashion, but I know that I have to still play within a certain demographic or a certain type of consumer.
Well, I think that has a lot to do with fit. And certainly in the apparel business, a lot has to do with fit, how things feel, and a respect for the human shape, how their bodies are and how to enhance them and how to make them look as fabulous as possible and for them to feel confident in them. Because it's not about how just dressing up a little dolly kind of thing and then they can't move, because then they would be really miserable and unhappy and someone would be shaking their fist at me, right? So I think that it's about designing for the customer and understanding what's going to make a beautiful fit, respecting using fabrics that will be a little bit more forgiving, and having something that once you fold it up into those little packages that then go through the mail, that it comes out and it looks good. So I tended to work in knit fabrics because when you pull it out of the package, you still want it to have the magic and you want it to feel nice and soft. I used to test it on the inside of my arms or on my neck to see if it felt good, because my idea was that I wanted all of my garments to feel like a hug.
Mhm.
And there's something about the way things feel. And when a customer loves the way they feel in a garment, they're going to wear it all the time.
Yeah. Do you find it's easier or more difficult to design for a mass audience versus a niche clientele?
Oh, I don't think so. I think it's really the same process. I think that if you know your customer, then when you have pen to paper, because I'm still old fashioned, I still put pen to paper and get my little pattern pieces out and think about how I'm going to create it, or I get sample fabrics and I drape them on the mannequin. I think, yeah, that's what I'm looking for. That's the look and feel.
Yeah, okay. So you mentioned like this idea of almost like when you see it, you recognize it, right? You just it kind of clicks for you. A lot of apparel brands are purchased by private equity these days, or they're bought up by much bigger companies. What is it that maybe these traditional financial buyers will get wrong or underestimate when they acquire a business like this?
Well, if I were looking to invest in an apparel company, if I were the person arriving on the doorstep with, a bag of cash saying, this is going to be a good investment for my group, I would look at all of their financial statements. I would look at whether or not they have contracts, what their distribution is. Do they have consistent, like for instance, as a former, vendor to Walmart, those vendor agreements were really important. It kind of meant it was up to me to screw up, not to have something to sell to Walmart. If I had a vendor contract, I could go in every week and say, hey, I got something that you're looking for, and then to make it work for them. So, for myself, I had QVC contracts. You want to see that what you're buying into, do they have good relationships with the mills? Are they sitting on inventory? And what is that inventory? Is it fabric that they can turn into money? Or is it garments that they screwed up that they need to not hang on to? I think that people get attached to their inventory, but it's my baby. No, just dump it. Like turn it into a liquid cash that you can work with. So I think you need the healthiness, and you also need to see how experienced the team is. What are they spending on the team? Are the salaries in line? Do they have incentives to make them perform? Or what's their churn rate in employees? I think those are the kinds of things that if you're buying a business, it's not just the fabric. It's, who are they selling to, and what is the team that is going to make it productive and continue turning that wheel over?
Yeah. Do you have any advice for financial buyers in terms of how to evaluate if the team is good or not?
Ooh, scary. That's scary. Wow. Well, I would first start not only with the financial statements, which I know every investor is well versed on how to read it. But I think that looking at cost cards, because a cost card really is a micro profit and loss. So you can see right away where the money is. You can see. So I think that I might want to go and talk to some of the retailers. I might want to go and see who's actually shipping out X, like, is it really there? Is it turning over? Is it, there are a lot of different ways of seeing whether or not if it's true of what people are buying into. And I think that a lot of people really present well, but the truth is really in, are they sustainable? Is this a growing business? Have they already reached their peak? Do they know how to grow the business? Do they know how to scale it? Or are they stuck into this is what I am, and this is who I am, and I'm fabulous, or are they willing to make some healthy changes?
Yeah, I think that there's an element of humility there that you have to have when you're selling a business, especially if you're going to stick around with it. You spent most of your career working and scaling other people's businesses, but now you're a founder, and you're a founder in a different industry completely. You've got a wellness brand. Was there anything that you learned being a founder that influenced, that said, you know what, if I could go back and do it again, I would either emphasize or de-emphasize these aspects of building a business, now that you're responsible for payroll and all the other stuff there that goes with it?
Well, yes, absolutely. First of all, I wanted to make sure that I treated that business, my Sydney Mar Wellness, as a client. And I basically looked at, like, what were my margins? How could I make it profitable? Product development in terms of the licensing and the costs, and how could I scale it up? How could I keep my inventory low enough and lean into really good, instead of having fabrics, did I have access to bioactive ingredients? That was really important to me, making sure that we had an access to enough of the companies that actually do the encapsules, because almost all, except one, I have a new product, are capsules. And the reason that I stayed in that space is because I felt more expert in it. My manufacturer is also very expert in homeopathy, but I'm not. I've taken some homeopathics, but I'm not that expert in it. So I wanted to kind of stay in my own lane. And I think that, when you're developing your own products, you should stay in your own lane. I think it's important to lean into your expertise. And as a former figure skater, I was always looking at what are the supplements I can take to give me optimal health. What are the things that I can make sure that I have a higher percentage of oxygen in my blood? And there were a lot of sort of boots on the ground things that I brought to the table in developing that. I also realized that for that collection, my Sydney Mar Wellness, I was less interested because I've already done hundreds of millions of dollars of business in fashion. So I felt that it gave me the ability to have more of a boutique line. Yes, I have the ability to scale when I want in the right markets, but I think that I wanted to make sure that I always had control of the fact that the ingredients are bioactive. I didn't want, like, for instance, I've had clients who have come back to me and said, oh, I've tried that ingredient. It's like someone saying, oh, I had a polyester garment before, or whatever, it's like, well, why is yours softer? Or why does yours work? I said, because it's bioactive. So that is something that I, as a founder of this brand, wasn't willing to give up. So I think that it's important to set your missions, your values, who you think the customer is, and why you're there to serve them, and then go and fulfill that.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Kind of shifting back to apparel, apparel is known to be very capital intensive. It takes a lot of cash in order to have the right portfolio, and if you don't sell, within season, you end up having markdowns, and it can just be a very, very cash intensive business. Are there any structural decisions beyond just focusing on the resale that determine if a brand is going to become cash generative, or kind of just something that requires more and more funding to keep the lights on?
If I were investing in an apparel brand right now, I wouldn't want to be at the beginning, because that is where they're figuring themselves out in the first place and establishing that they have a market. Like, they have to have their proof of concept. Are people buying it? Are people rebuying it? You need that sort of like I'm going to say strength. But you also want to make sure that we talked about Gap earlier. Gap is kind of like, it's not doing fabulously well because I think maybe they forgot to innovate. So they still needs to be not too young and not too old. It needs to be in the, still where there's excitement. For instance, I've been looking into a lot of different men's brands, and I was the designer for Edwin Jeans for many, many years for North America. One of the gentlemen I worked for, he had the master license for North America. So going back and looking at different menswear brands, I mean, if I were to say, who do I admire in menswear? Like if I wanted to invest, if I said, oh, wow, what's a menswear line? I would look at, say, Vuori. I mean, he really got it right. I mean, I go back and I look at his story and I said, yeah, like he got his fabric right. He got his marketing people right in the right place. Like he invested in, and he has a fabulous designer. So they have their fabric. They really put the work in the beginning. They became profitable fast, and they stayed in their own lane. It's really astonishing. And that is, I think that Vuori is probably an example of the kind of business I would invest in.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And we did a deep dive on Vuori. I think it was like the first episode on the other podcast, E-commerce on Tap. So yeah, fantastic story and founder there. You kind of, to take that idea and take it a step further, if you're evaluating a company and you were thinking about buying an apparel business, how do you separate if it is worth buying or it's just culturally hot right now?
Oh, it's all about the numbers. It's really all about the numbers, and I think that not one should not get swept away with, oh, it's a hot line right now. It has to be factual. And one of the things we didn't talk about is these companies also need really secure, really great relationships with the factories. Because we want to make sure that the factories, we don't want the design team to have a hissy fit and fight with the factory, and all of a sudden they're not doing you favors and you're at the back of the line, not the front of the line. That is why it's really important to respect the factories going in, to make sure that they have good tech packs, that you're doing something that they can produce, that you've already checked to make sure that they have the kind of machinery or capacity. Like I remember, it sounds funny, but I remember, a number of years ago when it was the pandemic, I did a big contract for the government and I needed to produce 50,000 face masks a week. And I needed to make sure that my factories were lined up and that it wasn't just one factory, but it was A, B, and C, so that, there could be a nice rollover. So I also think that knowing that they have the fabric sourcing sorted, they have a good team inside, that they have great factories is really, it's a recipe for success.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up the factory piece. I mean, I've said for a long time that there's two types of relationships you have. You can either be the client that they have to work with because you better be so big or so profitable, or you're the client that they want to work with because of all the things you mentioned, and just doing what you said you do. It goes a very long way in this industry.
Yeah, it does. I think that mutual respect with the factories, asking them to work with you, but also making it as easy as possible, because they don't make money talking to you. They make money
Right.
on the lines, so you need to give it to them in a way that they're making cupcakes. And then they want to make more of it, and they want to make more of it, and they want to make more of it. And that's really, that way they have their own security in being able to set up the lines. You can't be bumped easily. And if you have your fabric, if you have your design team, you have your factories, and you have where you're selling, that's all of those pieces need to be really secure. And that's really where the growth comes from.
Yeah, one of the criticisms I've heard people make about the fashion or the apparel industry is that it's inherently very fragile, just because it's trend driven, and you can kind of fall out of favor in really a couple of years if you miss on a certain season. Do you agree with that, or do you think it's much more durable than people are making it out for?
Well, it I think it depends on which companies, like for instance, if there is someone who wants to go to Alibaba and just grab the hot trend and put it on Amazon, and maybe they're in Amazon, so those are the type of people who are just going to get in and get out based on, what's new and exciting. But if it's a brand who has established a look and they have core items, then they're going to be able to touch it with the fashion trends. And today, people are looking more for, even if it is delivering fairly quickly, they're looking for slow growth. They're looking for building wardrobes. They're looking for, if you say the fast fashion word today, which, I have to say, I've definitely participated in. I feel like I'm one of the people who was responsible for bringing all of the shawls and all the leggings in early 2000s. I mean, it's my fault, and yeah, my fault for participating in fast fashion. But we made a lot of money. We turned dollars over every month. But the fact is that people are looking for classics that have the underpinnings of sort of classical fashion with something that makes it feel new and fresh. Because if I were teaching a master class with young designers today, I would actually get them to do say white t-shirts or black skirts, an
Really?
experiment. Yeah, because it's like, how do you make a white t-shirt for Walmart, for Holt Renfrew, for Selfridges in London? How do you make one for Rihanna? Like, all of those, they're just white t-shirts. How are you going to make them look different? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that is a great thought experiment. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, Sydney, I can't believe where the time has gone. This has been fantastic, and thank you so much for being on the podcast. We have one question that we always like to end with, and that is, what is the best example of a moat you've seen in their business build?
Well, I'm going to talk about Cirque du Soleil. I think that they really have established a brand identity that is it's so solid. Like, everybody knows what to expect, even if it's new. And I think that they've protected themselves by being so unique and individual and experiential that everybody wants to lean into. Every time there's a show, it's sold out. Every time, so they've built a look and feel for their brand that is going to go on forever. They're a circus, but they're not a circus. I mean, how great is that? And people know what to expect without knowing exactly what they're going to see. It's astonishing.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I had no idea they were based here in Montreal. I'll have to go catch a show.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Gee whiz. Well, if I can get an appointment for over there, I'll find out who the new buyers are. I'll drag you over so we can sit in the boardroom and watch the trapeze.
Sign me up. That sounds amazing. That's so good. Thanks for joining me on Build a Business Worth Buying, brought to you by ISBA Consulting. I hope today's conversation gave you real insights into scaling smarter, selling better, and thinking like a strategic operator. If you found value in this episode, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share with someone who's building their own sellable business. Until next time, remember, the real win isn't just building a business, it's building one worth buying.